And thank you, my beloved congregation, full of interesting women. I see your faces in the boxes for so often bringing these excellent topics to our Shabbat. For my brief biography, I'm going to jump into the middle of my life. When I was 40 years old, I found the brand new women's movement through a subscription to the brand new Ms. magazine. I owe the women's movement a lot. Then I returned to school to finish college and did years and years of graduate work and then psychoanalytic training. I'm a psychoanalyst in private practice, and as a hobby, I docent at the New York Historical Society, an idea that I got from Deb Freeman. Thank you, Deb. I'm mentioning all this education and development, late development, as women's studies and the women's movement was then in full bloom in graduate school and had a big influence on me and maybe on us all. 1970s, 1980. So I began to think for tonight about some major influences given to me by a few great feminists, although they may have not used the word. My thoughts have boiled down, perhaps simplicity, to a quality that my most admired women shared. To put it another way, what did these women I most admire do so well at? One, they were women who were full-on individualists and avoided playing stereotypical roles. They were not with women who were expected to be at their time and place. Without role models to follow, they became their own models. They did well in their chosen life until the very end. In short, they stood their ground, kept their individuality and their brilliance. And oddly enough, as I prepared the talk, I realized I thought of them when I was in my 40s as old women, the most ignored segment of our society, although I am now 20 years older than when I had that thought, and 20 years older than they were when I started being influenced by them. Hope that makes sense. Eleanor Roosevelt needs no introduction. Melanie Klein was a famous pioneering psychoanalyst, and Carolyn Heilbrun, a famous English professor, feminist, and writer. Let me begin with Carolyn Gold Heilbrun, famous English professor, a woman who lived her entire life resisting male stereotypes about women and how women should live. What was so radical in the 1960s to 80s? She was the first woman hired to teach by the Columbia University English Department faculty in 1960. And let me just throw in that the professor I eventually worked at, 2 years younger than me, was the first woman given tenure at Yale University English faculty. So we're not talking Middle Ages here. We're talking pretty recently. Okay, then she was the first woman, Carolyn Heilbrun, to be given tenure there as a full professor. She also founded the Women's Studies Institute at Columbia in the mid-1980s when I was there. And beside being famous as a first-wave feminist scholar and academic writer, brilliant teacher, she also wrote a series of mystery stories. She wrote them under the pen name Amanda Cross. And her hero was a woman, unusual at the time, Kate Fansler. So Amanda Cross was Carolyn Heilbrun. She felt it had been difficult enough to be taken seriously as a scholar and felt she would never be taken seriously as a tenured academic if she was known to be so frivolous as a writer of mystery novels. The point about her that so impressed me is that she grew to her age in complete personhood. She didn't change. She did it her way. As I said, I was then in my 40s and would see her coming down the hall in the English department building. She was then maybe 60-ish, which, silly me, I considered old. And she was very large in her long sweater vest and sensible shoes, complete unto herself, put together for ease and function. And I must confess, I was so afraid of her, I chose another woman professor to study under. That's Ann Douglas, first woman given tenure at Yale, who I ran into a few years ago at 78, still in the conventional sense gorgeous. So each of these women sort of did it in their own style. Any rate, Carolyn Heilbrun retired from teaching when she felt like it, moved from a huge country house filled with family, friends, and dogs to a tiny country place where she could be alone with her husband. I'd like to recommend to you, you might dip into Writing a Woman's Life. And I plan on her Amanda Cross mysteries for my August reading. Person 2, Melanie Klein, a giant of my own profession. To this day, her ideas incite controversy. All of these 3 women were considered controversial by some, adored by some. To this day, Melanie Klein's ideas insert arguments, fierce argument, and also influence followers who use her ideas. She was such a beauty in her young days that her many admirers in Vienna, Austria, she was called the Swan, which was in those days the very best thing or highest compliment you could pay a woman. But obviously, I don't think that was where she was going. She lived into her 80s, working, founded an institute, founded a psychoanalytic movement, and like Carolyn Heilbrun, secure in her personhood. One of the things she's most famous for is sort of as the inventor, if you will, or creator of child analysis or play therapy. We all know play therapy, but it was a new thing then. And she wrote about it very touchingly. She said, my little patient came and I went to the room, her son and daughter were older then, and picked out a few simple toys, which I brought in and put on the floor. As the little patient played, she could see that they were choosing the toys or playing with them in a way that indicated their interest or their concerns. That was their way of communicating with her. First brilliant insight. Second, and this was all new at the time, she said at the end of the session, she and the little patient put the things away in a little box, like a shoe box, and put the box on the shelf until the next time, the next session. And here's where, so brilliant. She said, I realized that box was the equivalent of confidentiality. What an imaginative leap. Separates the genius from the smart. And last, Eleanor Roosevelt, who we all adore and admire, one of the most remarkable, if not the most remarkable women or person of the 20th century. I don't know where to begin, except to say, I'll talk about something that we don't talk about with Eleanor Roosevelt, which was her looks. Graduating from finishing school and coming out as a debutante, she didn't want it. Her family insisted. She never went to college. She was a special person to everyone she met. Besides all her other gifts, she was charismatic. She was adored and loved all of her life. The recent biography written by Blanche Wiesen Cook is amazing. If I came into money, I would buy dozens and dozens of this and put them in a pile on a street corner and give them out to every woman in the world, because we think we know Eleanor Roosevelt, but we realize in reading Blanche Wiesen Cook's biography of her, how much what we write about can be determined by the dominant culture. So to tie it all together, what did they have in common? What was the message for me? They all chose being a person first. How radical, each in their own way. And their later years fascinated me. And they were each different. Heilbrun was married to Ben Heilbrun, an economist, all her life. They seem to have been very close, and she never stopped writing. Her friends and students devoted to her. Melanie Klein had an early marriage back in Vienna, but came to England alone with her children and does not seem to be interested in anything but her work, working as an analyst, a writer, mentor to many. And Eleanor Franklin, when she and Franklin went their separate ways, except as a political team, Eleanor continued her worldwide fabulousness, but also she had lovers, not all at once, 4, not all at once. 1 a woman, 3 men. Lorena Hicks was her first lover, and she was close all through Lorena's slow death from diabetes. Incidentally, all 4 were pretty charismatic, amazing people. Earl Miller, her chauffeur and bodyguard, amazing athlete, was next. Joseph Lash, historian and biographer, first biographer of Franklin and Eleanor, was third. And she was close to these men through their marriages. As I said, she was a very charismatic and loyal and compelling person. She lived her last years in a townhouse that she shared with a longtime companion, maybe platonic, maybe not, Philip, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Philip Gurvich, and his wife, Edna. Now, I never met Melanie Klein. I did see Carolyn Heilbrun, but was too afraid, except for one time I went to her office and asked a question that I can't even remember. I was so petrified. She was so completely without affectation, like come in, how, what I would consider that kind of approach. She wasn't like that. And she scared me. The last person, Eleanor Roosevelt, I did meet. Now, meet is very pretentious. She came to speak at our school and then stood after the talk to shake the hand of all the students as we lined up backstage. So I want to describe that. And again, I want to talk about her looks because that's not usually what we focus on. I was a very small 8th grader, one of the shortest in the class. And when I got across into the crowded space, I had to look way up. Eleanor Roosevelt was 6 feet tall. And in her 60s then, 1954, and she was born in 1884, she was still slender, straight, and beautifully dressed. What I now remember, I can't see from like the chest up, but I remember her shoes, beautiful black leather pumps with those clunky heels that women wore, Cuban heels, but beautiful leather. I'm sure they were custom made for her, and a gray, what we used to call sheath or straight dress. But now I recognize the perfect tailoring of that simple dress, the kind that had the long zipper up the back, and the exquisite quality of the gray wool. So, as I said, she was in her 60s. I had the nerve at 13 to think old woman, although I had heard the name Eleanor Roosevelt. And she lived on, as I said, until the end, doing her fabulous works and being adored. And she had sought male company. So Carolyn Heilbrun, one partner, Melanie Klein, an early marriage, but she came to England alone with her family, and I think was only interested in her work. And Eleanor Roosevelt, the story I just told. So I'm inspired by them, not such a great follower, or let's say that personhood for women of my generation, and maybe still today, is a work in progress, or one day at a time, or at least that conventional training dies hard. But then again, we all need our heroines. Thank you all.